Welcome to the Economic Club's 565th in our continuing series of distinguished speakers. My name is Marion Hoffman, and I have the honor of being your club president. I hereby call this meeting to order, and if you'll please silence your cell phones so that our program is not interrupted. And now, if you would stand with me and do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Okay, you can be seated. Thank you. Welcome again, everyone. We have another exciting program, and I'm very, very happy about today's speaker, Commissioner of Agriculture and Consumer Services, Wilton Simpson. Our own club member, Stephen Lamar Hall, is here, and he will be introducing the commissioner shortly. But we have another outstanding sponsor, and our sponsor today is TECO Energy. We will hear from Justin Thames in just a moment. Justin is the Director of State Government Relations for TECO. Please be sure to visit the Economic Club of Florida's website. We continually are making improvements, and it's our one-stop shop for all things Economic Club. You can also see our speaker schedule, special events we have. You can look on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and you can see updates on Twitter. Now, some information about our upcoming speakers and programs. On Monday, March 27th, at the Dunlop Championship Club, we are honored to have General David Petraeus. As you know, he's a retired United States Army general, and he served as director of the Central Intelligence Agency and was commander of International Security Assistance Force. He will share with us geopolitical and macroeconomic consequences in the war in Ukraine. He's going to talk about NATO expansion and the current tensions between China, Taiwan, and the United States. These are all trends we all should be following, so you won't want to miss it. On April the 5th, led by our Vice President, Katrina Roll, we will be having a membership recruitment reception again at the Governor's Club. If you are a trustee or a club member and you have a prospective member, we ask that you please reach out to our great executive director, Lizette, for more information. Again, that's April the 5th at the Governor's Club. And there will be email notices about this event. So as you know, membership is the lifeblood of our organization. So we are really, really proud to have recruited a lot of new members in the last 3 months. So if you are a new member who joined in the last 3 months, would you stand to be recognized, please? Now I would like to thank our trustee members. Our club's trustees provide additional financial support to the club each year. Trustees receive exclusive benefits such as attending receptions with the speakers. They're also invited to attend special events. So now if you're a trustee, would you please stand so we can thank you? And if you're interested in becoming a trustee, please see me or any members of the board because we welcome you. And now I'd like to go around the room and invite or recognize our guests. And I will start if that's okay, because I have 2 guests and I'm very proud to be bringing guests that are the new up and comers in our fine city. 2 young ladies, if you would stand, Helen Smith and Rebecca Romero. They are with Strategic Digital Services, and we're so glad you're here, ladies. Thank you. Okay, let's start over here. If you have a guest, would you please stand and invite your guest? Anyone? Okay, please.
Good afternoon. I'm wearing an expected hat before the Florida County Association Director and support of agriculture and our youth of agriculture. I had 2 guests today, though. I'd like to introduce one is Steve Wynn. Many of y'all know Steve, he's the executive director of FOMA here, the Florida Hospitality Medical Association. But he's also a member of the Florida Cattlemen's Association and the Gadsden County Cattlemen's Association. So we appreciate him being here and welcome to come back. Second guest is Dr. Dean Pringle. Dr. Pringle is with the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agriculture Science. He is the new executive director of the North Florida Research and Education Center in Quincy, Mariana, and over in Live Oak. So we have just come here from the University of Florida and Florida natives from the popular. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you. And now, Chris, if you would please introduce your guests.
Good morning, everyone. Those I haven't met, I'm Chris Manuel, work from the University of Florida. I've got two of my colleagues from IAPS here today. We got Christopher Hodge and Mary Ann Hooks.
Thank you. Okay. Hello.
Good morning. I'm two guests today. I have Caroline Linscott. She is a senior product designer with Navistar. And I also have her husband, Homer Linscott, who works for the Department of Agriculture, the Environment Department.
Thank you. Thank you. Jenny, please.
Jenny Taylor.
Thank you. Miss Wade, please.
Hi, I'm Chris Wade with Dell's Solutions, and I have my two colleagues here, Wade Furley and Dean Gammas, also with Dell's Solutions, and we have higher ability to write a decision of data.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Please.
Yeah, I'm going to see Banks, and I can call them Dr. Fisher, who works with our corporate banking team.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, please.
I guess, yeah, Yanko, who is the retired nurse practitioner who had her own practice for about a decade.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. And finally, I would like to give a special welcome to the Commissioner's fine staff, Aaron Keller and Jessica. Spelled differently, is that right? Kelleher, excuse me. Thank you all for coming. If you would like to join, we would welcome you. So now I would like to introduce the head table. And if you could please hold your applause until the very end to keep things on time. Beginning on my far right and your left, please welcome to the Economic Club, Stephen Hall. Stephen serves as General Counsel for the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services and has held various roles in the department since he graduated from law school. Stephen is a sixth-generation Florida farmer growing up outside Malone, Florida, and he continues to have an active role in his family's farming operations. One fun fact about Stephen is that he once discussed agriculture policy with the Prince of Ghana. I think that's pretty neat. Okay, next to him, we have Katina Glasgow. She is the owner of Katina's Janitorial and Cleaning Services. She is a small business owner for 17 years and is a new member of the Economic Club. One fun fact about Katina is she loves to travel, and she's been to Dubai, Paris, and the Dominican Republic, and all within 1 year. And now on my far left, or your right, we have Justin Thames. Justin is the Director of State Government Relations for TECO Energy. He recently joined TECO after representing the CPA industry for 11 years, and he's a graduate of Leadership Florida. One fun fact about Justin, he's the proud father of Eliza May, who just turned 5 in December, but this one is my favorite. He played trumpet in the Old Miss marching band. I added that, he didn't. So, and next to Justin is our fine speaker who will be introduced in just a moment. And then finally, we have our good friend, Bill Graham. Bill Graham recently retired after 9 years as Executive Director of the Florida Educational Negotiators and the Florida School Labor Relations Service. In this role, he worked with superintendents and school boards on collective bargaining and employee relations. Bill enjoys yard work, which he said was greatly enhanced during the pandemic, and he discovered that yard work was the ultimate social distancing activity, and his neighbors would wave at them as they would pass on by. So one fun fact about Bill is that he's an Eagle Scout, and as you know, once an Eagle Scout, always an Eagle Scout. And so now if you would join me with applause for the head table, please. And so, as I mentioned, we accept luncheon sponsorships, and a sponsor has special privileges. They have their business logo displayed. They are focused on, they're on all the tables. You see the table tents. They're focused in our Echo newsletter and luncheon materials. And we're very, very grateful for our luncheon sponsors. So today, our primary sponsor is TECO Energy. Tampa Electric is a subsidiary of Emera. I keep saying it wrong, but I'm working on it. A North America leader in the transition of cleaner energy, Tampa Electric has supplied the Tampa Bay area with electricity since 1899 and serves over 800,000 residential, commercial, and industrial customers. Its West Central Florida service area covers 2,000 square miles, which include Hillsborough, Polk, Pasco, and Pinellas counties. So now I invite Justin Thames to please come offer greetings on behalf of TECO.
Hey, thank you, Marion, and the Economic Club. I'm just really happy to be with everyone today. And on behalf of TECO Energy, we're honored to be the sponsor of today's meeting and provide the opportunity for everyone to hear from our favorite Commissioner of Agriculture, the best Commissioner of Agriculture, at least within the last 4 years. So probably ever. So, you know, at TECO, our team of experts are, as Marion mentioned, focused on safely delivering cleaner, affordable, and reliable energy every hour of every day. Today is day 8 for me, but I can attest to you that that is a huge focus of our company, especially on the safety side. So with everything we do, safety is our #1 priority, so much so that we start every meeting with with the safety tip of the day or safety minute of the day. So in that same spirit, to stay on brand, I'm here to offer you a safety tip of the day, especially living here in Tallahassee. These are some home safety tips to remember. Lock your doors and your windows, even if you're home. Ensure your home is well lit. Always have an alarm system or some kind of home video surveillance system. And then get to know your neighbors. It's always good to know your neighbors, especially in Tallahassee. And then finally, for those of you who live in Leon County or Tallahassee proper, you'll notice this, but always remember to lock your car doors around 9 o'clock at night. Make sure they're locked. Isn't that right, Sheriff? So in the coming years, TECO will continue to focus on ways that we can strengthen and modernize the electric grid, expand our investments in cleaner energy to diversify our portfolio and manage the price of energy. And then finally, we want to enhance our partnerships with customers at the grid edge for greater customer control and options. I want to thank everybody again for the opportunity to be with you today. I've enjoyed it. It's nice to meet many of you and see a lot of familiar faces. And I know Marion will be on top of things as she recruits me for membership into the club. So I look forward to seeing you all again very soon. So thank you very much.
And now, Stephen, I invite you to introduce your boss.
No pressure. Well, it is truly my pleasure to introduce my boss, as Marion pointed out, who even if he wasn't my boss, I would still like to say nice things about him. So Wilton Simpson is Florida's 13th Commissioner of Agriculture, is a 5th generation Floridian, proud to be born and raised right here in the Sunshine State. A lifelong farmer, entrepreneur, Commissioner Simpson has a deep personal and professional roots grounded in agriculture, including a large-scale laying operation that supplies eggs for Florida's families throughout supermarkets across the state. Many of you know that from 2012 through 2022, Commissioner Simpson served as a member of the Florida Senate and was elected Senate President for the 2020 through 22 term. Serving as Senate President throughout the worldwide pandemic came with many challenges, but Commissioner Simpson fought to keep Florida open and free and to ensure Florida was a beacon of hope, opportunity, and freedom for generations to come. Commissioner of Agriculture oversees the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. With his background in agriculture, Commissioner Simpson clearly understands the challenges faced by our Florida farmers. His legislative service and history of community involvement also positions him to guide the department's other important functions, including such as protecting the environment, ensuring the availability, affordability, and safety of our food supply, and protecting Florida's consumers. Commissioner Simpson lives in Trilby with his wife, Kathy. Their son, Wilton Jr., and his wife, Caroline, are practically neighbors, as are Commissioner Simpson's daughter, Lauren, her husband, Kenton, and their daughters. Among his many accomplishments, Commissioner Simpson's most esteemed title is Papa to his two beautiful granddaughters, Addie and Emmy. It is my pleasure to introduce to you my boss, Commissioner Wilton Simpson.
Thank you. That was just about how I wrote it for him. So that's good. So are there any questions? It's all down from here, right? And if there's a reporter in the room, you can't use 2/3 of what I say. It's attorney-client privilege. Sorry about that, but we got that out of the way. The first thing is I always get asked, the very first question I normally get asked are, I'm from Trilby. Everybody says, well, where is Trilby, Florida, right? So I'm going to clear that up today for everyone in the room. It's real easy to know. It's right beside Lacucci, Florida. Yeah. Which is also, of course, right beside Trillacucci. And it all fits probably within 1,000 acres. And there is an egg farm there I live on. And we have 1 million birds, approximately. We produce 2 million dozen eggs a month, approximately. And of course, we produce a lot of organic fertilizer. And I always like to tell a story, and I'll tell it later, about the Right to Farm bill that we did that'll include some opportunities from that. But what did we accomplish? In the last, I served in the Florida Senate the last 10 years, and I really enjoyed serving in the Florida Senate. And if you had told me there was going to be a worldwide pandemic, you're going to serve in the Senate for 10 years, and you're going to be Senate President, I would have known where those intersections would have happened. I would have known in my 2 years. And by the way, it was such an honor to work through the pandemic as your Senate President. We had many challenges. Challenge number one was getting our state reopened. The governor appointed me to chair one of his committees back in April of 2020 for the reopening committee for the state of Florida. We worked very hard on that. And we use data here in Florida and not emotion to govern how we reopened our state. We knew the consequence of not reopening was much worse than locking down. But what were the consequences of not reopening? First of all, if you can measure an economic scale, all the small businesses that would go out of business, generational businesses that would have perhaps went out of businesses, children not going to school, in-person school. You don't lose a year for a year at second or third or fourth grade. You may lose that generation. And Florida was back in school in August. We knew it was safe. We knew that population, and we knew those children could go back safely and adapt. And we also knew that you had to take care of your most vulnerable. We knew people with pre-existing health conditions. We knew this in April, right? This didn't take 6 months to figure out. We knew that if you had pre-existing conditions, you had to take care of yourself. You had to be more precautionary. A lot of times we put masks on our faces. And one of my businesses that I've been in since I was 10 years old, thanks to my dad, was the asbestos removal business, mold remediation businesses. So when you think about COVID, if you're going to deal with that, you're going to have an N95 respirator, or in our case, we use P100s, to do asbestos removal with. We knew that a mask that was a cloth mask was not going to offer a real high level of protection. Although that a lot of national media, a lot of commentary was that you had to wear these masks. You almost had no protection factor from those masks. Now, if you wore an N95 or a P100, that's different. And improperly decon yourself. But we knew that going into this scenario. So we had to revamp how we had our Capitol open that year. If you'll remember, we had our staff and senators, and I believe House members too, we were getting tested every week as we come up for session. The worst thing that could happen to us in that 2 years as a legislature was not be able to do your state business, not be able to finish on time, especially by July the 1st. And we set up a process by which people who wanted to come testify went to the Civic Center. We set up a process there to be put into the committee room. So we had in-person live, interaction with the public on our bills. And we kept the Senate open that year. And through that year, there were, I'm going to say 4 or 5 senators that when they got there on Sunday night or Monday morning before they engaged in their Senate activities had COVID. And they went home and they took care of COVID and then they come back. Had we not have done those procedures that year, we could have been possibly shut down for many weeks at a time, because you could have had 20, 30, 40, well, there's only 40 of us, right? You could add all of us with COVID. And so it was something that was very important to us at the time. We don't talk about it a lot, but how did we get here from 2 years ago and come through the pandemic? How did we become that shining state on the, of the United States? And it's because we let constitutional rights prevail in adverse times. And by the way, there's nowhere in our Constitution where it says in adverse times you lose your constitutional rights. If we are at war, you have your constitutional rights. And if we have a worldwide pandemic, you still have those constitutional rights. And we spent a lot of time those 2 years making sure that the state of Florida was different than most other states were treating this pandemic. When we left on a 10-year Senate career, I can proudly say over those 10 years that more than $10 billion of tax cuts were had in those 10 years. We paid down more than $10 billion of your state debt, which peaked, by the way, in about 2010 at somewhere around $30 billion. And states generally have debt. The one that I sometimes compare us to is New York. They're a state of 2.5 million less people, 3 million less people. They have over $160 billion of debt. Your state today has less than $18 billion of debt. So when you think about the debt reduction, when you think about the taxes being rebated to the state each year, like I said, over $10 billion, all with a balanced budget, which is constitutionally required, by the way. We very proudly balance our budget. And when we left session 9 months ago, at the end of my presidency, we had over $22 billion of reserves in your reserve accounts here in the state of Florida. To put that in perspective, the previous high watermark on reserves was probably around $4 to $4.5 billion. And so we were very proud of the condition that we left the state in. We thought that Florida, clearly you're seeing this on a national scale. You can travel nowhere in this country. I went to Ben Roethlisberger's last game in Pittsburgh. And I go in there, and of course, the first thing they'll tell you is like, "Oh, sir, so you have to put your mask on." And it's like, well, I'm from Florida. We gave up on that a year ago. And it's like, well, in the common areas, you're supposed to wear a mask or whatever. But by the way, we're moving to Florida. Of course you're moving to Florida. Everybody is moving to Florida. And we have roads that run north also, right? I mean, they just all run south. And, but anyways, but it was and so as you traveled around the country, we knew that Florida was really something that other states were admiring. And it didn't matter if it was a blue or a red state. A lot of the people that lived in those states admired the way that we managed Florida. And had they have known about our budget and all the things that we were doing to manage that from a business perspective, and they figured that out. It's public records, obviously, but it was something we're very proud of. Another area we worked very hard on in my 2 years as Senate President, and even leading up to that, was our fostering and adoption of children. It was not uncommon to take a couple of years to get to where you were able to adopt a child, qualified to adopt a child through the processes you had to go through. In my 2 years as Senate President and leading up to Senate President, we streamlined that operation. We should be able to have people get qualified within a few months, right? You're doing background checks, you're doing in-home visits, you're doing things of that nature. That should take weeks and months, not years. And when you had 30-something thousand kids in foster care, you would think that our goal may be to reduce that count. And the best way to do that was to get more folks qualified. And another area we fixed that I think really is going to reduce that count is we now have relative caregivers get the same amount of money as non-relative caregivers with their foster kids. So you can foster a relative today and get the resources and support you need to help manage that new expectation, that new life that has come into your family, including on an educational basis, including on daycare basis, because we require foster kids at the state level to have a certain level of education and fostering. And then we just didn't give you the money to do it, right? We require things and then we don't pay for them. We fixed that in last year's budget. I think it was about $35 million a year of recurring revenue that we put towards that effort. And when you think about that in the CDC's, CBC's, as long as I had been serving, had been woefully under budgeted, and we've 100% funded all of those budgets last year, costing you about another $100 million a year, I believe, in recurring revenue. It was something we were very proud of. And our ultimate goal there is to not have to have children in foster care, right? We want to get them adopted. The earlier you can get a child adopted into a family, then the better opportunity they have at an 80-year life. It exponentially gets better. Their education gets better. The care gets better. They're in a loving family. The entire system will work better. And government makes a horrible parent. And so it's something we worked very hard on, and I'm very proud that those things got finished. One of the businesses issues that had been dragging on for many years was the Wayfair issue. So our local economy was people would come visit, they would pull out their computer, and they would go online and they would buy products outside the state of Florida and they wouldn't pay sales tax. And when we passed that bill last year, it was 2 years ago, I think, it was over $1 billion of projected revenue annually. In the state of Florida, we do not only do we not raise taxes, we do not give the appearance of raising taxes. And so we worked with our partners on in several groups to figure out, well, what would we do with this $1 billion if we get this bill passed? And we did two things. The first thing we did was we said, because of the pandemic, the unemployment trust fund was at $4 billion when we left in 2020. When we came back, it was zero. But obviously, unemployment went from basically zero to about 5 million people overnight. And it depleted those funds. We said, look, you know what we're going to do? We're going to take that $1 billion a year and we're going to backfill the unemployment compensation fund. So that business in this state do not have to pay that additional tax while they're trying to recover from a pandemic. And we did that for the first 4 years of that tax dollar. When that time is up, and I think that's next year, then that goes to pays the lease tax down. So if you lease a building in the state of Florida today, you pay sales tax on that. And when I first got here, I think it was 6%. We had whittled it down because it was such a big number. It was like $1.5 billion of revenue a year, and it's hard to get rid of that much recurring revenue at one time. So we had slowly cut into that. And with the Wayfair tax, I believe next year it's essentially going to get wiped out. So if you are currently leasing a building and paying sales tax, I believe that's going to go away. And we thought, what better way to support our local communities and our local businesses than to take the dollars of out-of-state retailers and pay down those business expenses of in-state opportunities. We revolutionized the septic and sewer systems in this state. We put $500 million in a trust fund. When you think about your waterways and your pollutions, a lot of folks point the finger at farmers, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But the real source of most of our nutrient load in this state are septic systems. 40 to 70% of your nutrient load and most of your water bodies come from septic systems, and they've been being put in for hundreds of years now, or 100 years or more, and that's a big part of that nutrient load. We put $500 million in a trust fund to pay down for local governments to draw down to change out these systems, put people on sewer systems, and then use advanced wastewater treatment facilities to get rid of the nutrient loads going into our waterways. So when you think about that, it was something we're very proud of. I think it's something that obviously is already paying dividends, but certainly 10, 15 years from now, when 25, 28, 30 million people are living in the state of Florida, we're going to be very proud that we started now. And I'm in earnest on that. One of the major areas that I was something that I was really leaning in on, Moffitt Cancer Center. If y'all don't know what Moffitt Cancer Center is in Tampa, Florida, Tampa Bay area of Florida. Had run out of room to grow in the Hillsborough area in one center. And so about 6 or 7 years ago, I was speaking to Lee Moffitt, past Speaker of the House, that started Moffitt Cancer Center, started the funding process. And we were talking about how could we improve and enhance Moffitt's opportunities in the state of Florida and the world, for that matters. And I said, well, we've run out of room in Hillsborough. We need, 500 acres, 1,000 acres that we could build a campus on that could continuously grow over the next 50 or 100 years if we're going to do it right. Right? You could put Band-Aids on these things and you could patch, but if you're really going to do this right, you need to be able to continuously grow. And then not only that, invite partners from all over the world to come there for this research and build those businesses out. So I was very proud that we did a groundbreaking a few weeks ago on what's going to be a major research center there in Pasco County. And this will be one of the world's best research cancer treatment facilities anywhere, obviously, in the world. And I believe it's going to be a destination, and it already is. So I know when this gets built out. And what I said there, their groundbreaking is the tens of thousands of lives that are going to be saved by this move starting in a few years is all going to make it worth it. The grandparents that can be grandparents, the quality of life of our parents and even our children that come down with these childhood cancers. We're going to, in the state of Florida, be a world leader on this issue. And that was something I was very proud to get finished. And I will say this, and then I'll talk about some agricultural stuff, but one of the things that we really worked on about 3 years ago, the state of Florida passed a minimum wage law that said by 2026, you had to have everyone to $15 an hour. By 2026, $15 an hour. And so at the time, a lot of business owners was in a lot of distress, right? Because it was not uncommon, $8, $9, $10, $11 an hour. I think national minimum wage at the time was $8.35 or $8.45 an hour. And was like, this is going to be a real disaster for business within the state of Florida. Now, every one of you here that are business owners, imagine hiring somebody for less than $15 an hour. And this is 2023. We got 3 years to go. And so your state workers are woefully underpaid. We have really good soldiers in this state doing really good work on all of our behalfs every day, making $10, $11, $12 an hour. People working in nursing homes, it's quasi-state agencies making $10, $11 an hour that's taking care of our parents and grandparents today. People driving school buses, making $10, $11, $12 an hour. And every morning you get up and you hear, well, there's 500 short in Pasco County. There's 700 short in Hillsborough County of bus drivers. Now, that's probably not true either, right? Everybody's getting to school and back. So we're not 500 short or 700 short. But the truth is how do you hire someone for $11 or $12 an hour to drive a bus that's going to put your children on it to take them to school and take them back home? And so last year, when we did our budget, we raised all of state employees, including those nursing homes and affiliations, to $15 an hour. That was something that was very important. You had rampant inflation, and think about that for a second. Inflation hurts the most the people who can afford it the least. And so we were very proud to raise those wages to $15 an hour 4 years ahead of time that we would have been mandated to in 2026. And I believe you're already seeing proposals this year to do some additional raises, across the board raises for your state employees. And that's something we should all be very proud of. And again, we're not competing with private industry, but if we're going to competently run your state government, you have to be in a position where you can pay people a wage where they can maybe only have to work 2 jobs instead of 3. And so anyways, it's something that was very important to me, and I was very proud to see that get done. When you think about agriculture, I've been the commissioner now about 5 weeks, I think, 5 or 6 weeks. It doesn't feel like we're drowning anymore. We've got a great staff and a great team. You've met some of them here today, but we've got a great team at the Department of Agriculture. We're adding a lot of new members. We have been adding a lot, and we do so many different expansive things. But when you think about agriculture, it's a $180 billion industry a year. And it's second leading driver of the economy. Tourism's number 1. In the pandemic and in recessionary times, agriculture's number 1. About 2.5 million people in the state of Florida work in agriculture somewhere. And I think we think of it most of the time as an economic driver, or, should ag really exist at the level it does exist? So now we're going to talk about it in terms of being a national security issue. And when you think about oil and the gas industry, immediately that is a national security issue. We have strategic supplies, and we do all types of things to ensure that if a war breaks out or we have distress in that system, we have strategic supplies to backfill those systems. to at least manage our economy or the expectations. Agriculture is not seen in the light normally as a national security issue, but I will say that everybody here should think of farmer. I think Chris Sprouse said this when we was passing one of our bills last year. You should think of farmer 3 times a day, right? We just got finished eating food that was grown by a farmer. And if you don't put it in national security terms, think of it like going to the grocery store for a week with no groceries there. Then it becomes a national security issue in a hurry, right? And think about 2 weeks, right? And so in other words, when you consider what agriculture really does for us, and what we need from it, it has to be elevated to that lens. So anytime we're regulating agriculture, that's the lens you have to look through. Anytime you're thinking about, it sure would be nice not to have certain farmers because there's nutrient load coming off of these farms. And I will agree with you, there are nutrient load generally coming off of most farms that we have in this state. Generally, if you do an analysis of the area that that farmer is in, it is a thimbleful of nutrient load relative to the 5 gallons of nutrient load that's being created around them. And of course, it's easy to target agriculture, and we do. How do we do that? We do it through best management practices. The vast majority of your farmers, large farmers especially, are on best management practices. We have IFAS and UF working with us continuously with the legislature and the Department of Ag to improve those best management practices. There's not one farmer in this state that wants to put down more fertilizer than is necessary, because it costs money to put that fertilizer down. We don't want to use one more drop of water than we need. And over the last 20 or 30 years, water demand in most of our crops have been reduced from 50 to 80% in some cases. The water on your crops. You don't hear that story very often. But every day for the last 20 years, we've all eaten something or we wouldn't be here today, right? And so farmers are your first environmentalists. We are just as concerned about the environment as anyone else should be. Our families live on the farms that are producing this food. And so if you think, well, we really don't care, well, do we really not care about any of our family members either, right? And so it's really a thing that we need to look at, a regulatory structure, or when you're putting additional weights on the back of your farmers, as a hurricane does. Can't do nothing about Mother Nature. Hurricanes are going to come and go. Farmers have to deal with that. But when the federal government or your state government or your local government is adding additional weights to those farmers' backs, they need to look at it through the lens of national security. And I'll give you one big example. 80% of your vegetables on the eastern seaboard of the United States is grown in the Palm Beach and EAA area every year. There are people who want to shut all of that agriculture area down, right? And you'd say, well, what if you did shut that down? What would happen? Well, clearly we would have to try to import a lot more food. And then you'd think, well, the people that we're importing this food from are trading partners, and they would never cut that food supply off, right? Not even in a pandemic would you cut that food supply off. Now think about Germany 30 years ago. So 30 years ago, Germany decided to put several pipelines in from Russia to have cheap natural gas coming into Western Europe. And then think about it in the terms of they'll never cut that off, right? In hell and high water and, wars, they would never cut off this energy supply because it's the main source of their revenue supply. Then fast forward to 2022 and a little war with Ukraine breaks out in Russia. And not only did they cut their natural gas off to Europe, they then blew up the system to deliver it. And so if you want to entrust your enemies with your energy supply, at your own peril, do so. If you want to trust them with your food supply, at your own peril, do so. The difference is we will overcome $4 or $5 gasoline if we have to, $6 gasoline if we had to. We're Americans. We will innovate. We have ingenuity. Overcome 2 weeks of no groceries in the grocery store. Yeah, you can't do that one. It'd be total chaos. And so when you think about agriculture, think about it through that lens. We've got a lot of really neat things happening. The wildlife corridor was something that's very important to me. We got defined a few years ago. Within your wildlife corridor, that's what it sounds like, right? Wildlife can move from Monroe County to Pensacola. That's great, and it's necessary. What else happens in that wildlife corridor? It's your major water recharge of your aquifer. It is where most all your food grows. Is in that space. So rural family lands is something that last year we funded $300 million. And to put it in perspective, In 2001, when this program was invented, from 2001 to 2021, they had spent $100 million of your state money to go into rural family lands. And what does it do? It buys development rights from your farmers. And what's the difference in buying those development rights, or fee simple? Under buying development rights, the property stays on your tax roll. It's contributing to your local economy. Farmers have to manage that land, not your state. So every time we buy a piece of property in this state, then we have to expend dollars to manage that piece of property. We have many pieces of property in the state that should be probably remove the development rights from and surplus back into private hands. That's the conversation we should be having, because then you can do things on that property and grow food and things and put it back on the tax rolls. The notion that we're going to buy up a lot more land is ludicrous. And there are some pieces necessary, right? There's some spring heads and things of that nature you may want to do that with. But the vast majority of the land that we probably hold in state coffers today, you could remove those development rights. You could surplus that land and get it active again and helping our local economies thrive and survive. And so rural family lands is something that's very important. We put $300 million in last year, 3 times as much as since inception. What are we doing with your money? We're going to spend it buying those development rights from farmers. What does that ensure us 50 or 100 years from now? You got farmlands. You've got a wildlife corridor. You got your major water recharge for your aquifer and your environment. That's what that ensures you. We've asked the legislature to put another $300 million this year to continue that program. It's something that we hope that they'll consider and something that we're very proud of, because it touches so many different areas and facets of our state government and opportunities that we have. We have a couple of others. The farm team card, every year we will come up with a idea of let's cut taxes on your farmers, specific ideas. So like last year, we did a sales tax cut that took away for fencing materials, gates, trailers, and things of that nature. It cost us collectively as a state about $17 million a year in recurring revenue to do that. What happens if you are a farmer and you go pick up a one-off gate or something like that, you have to fill out several pieces of paper to get your tax break. And in a lot of cases, farmers would get there and you don't have 10, 15 minutes to fill out the paperwork. You just pay the $1.50 in sales tax, $2, whatever, and you move on. We're going to set up an identification card for your bona fide farmers to where, just like a driver's license, they would show the card, they'll get their sales tax cut without having to fill out all that paperwork. So we're trying to make it easier on them to survive. And when you think about Florida First vegetables and fresh from Florida and all the things that we do here in this state, one of our bills this year is looking at a Florida First program where our corrections, our state agencies, our school systems will look for Florida produce first before it goes outside of the state, so that we're supporting our local farmers. That's something that is very important to us. And I'll mention one other bill that we did 2 years ago, and then I'll be available for questions. The Right to Farm bill. So 2 years ago, it was brought to my attention, and I've been a farmer all my life. We've been very fortunate and not really been sued through the years. But we have a lot of farmers that historically are just continuously being sued. Nuisance lawsuits, dust on dirt roads, going onto other people's properties, cranking tractors up too early, nutrient load systems, things of that nature. And I had one of my friends say that, hey, we're getting sued all the time. We can't afford this, right? That's putting pressure on your farmers to put them out of business. Then some developer comes along and then you got houses planted there instead of corn or watermelons or whatever, strawberries. And so the bill we did 2 things. We said that in the future, under the Right to Farm Act in the state of Florida, if you're going to sue a farmer, you have to live within a half a mile of them. So you have to be our neighbor. Now, when the pandemic hit, we got a lot of neighbors, right? A lot of people, why do those tractors crank up at 5 in the morning, right? Because we can't see good at 4. That's why we wait till 5. And, well, what are y'all spraying over there on those fields? Well, it's none of your business. Go back and eat your breakfast. And so, but you had a lot of folks moving out to the countryside telling farmers how to farm. And what are all these nuisances? There's a dirt road there. Well, it's going to create dust when you drive on it, right? And so we said you have to live within a half a mile of a farmer to sue them. That's number one. So all this out-of-state business, all these big corporations from around the country, it put them out of business immediately. And you'll remember I'm in the egg business. And so at my egg farm, we have a lot of organic fertilizer that we have to get rid of every year. So 1 million chickens produces about 320 20-yard loads of fertilizer every year they have to get rid of. Now, if I had been sued by a neighbor, you can imagine where about 4 or 5 of those loads would have went. Hey, by the way, the reporter can't report that. Certainly I wouldn't do that today. But the reality is, and in number 2, when the farmer wins their lawsuit, and we inevitably generally do, if you're with best management practices, you always do. It's a certainty that you're going to win that lawsuit. You have spent, in some cases, as many as hundreds of thousands of dollars defending your right to produce food for our society, the most affordable, abundant, safe food anywhere in the world. And now that the person that sues a farmer has to pay their attorney fees when the event's over with. So you can tell that's had a major chilling effect on the lawsuits towards your farmers. It's very important when you hear groups talking negatively about farmers. Generally, those are unfounded type of accusations. Not always. There are bad actors in every business, but the vast majority of those are unfounded. And we're working very hard with our farmers to make sure they're following the best management practices. We're looking at putting guidelines together for smaller farmers with maybe less than 20 acres this coming year to work with these landowners. Landowners do not want to pollute the waterways, their environment. Certainly they don't. They normally manage these lands not to do those things. And as a Department of Agriculture, we're making that one of our top priorities with cost share programs and things of that nature to do regional projects. And I believe you're going to see some lasting effects coming in the next few years. So thank you for having me here. When I heard General Petraeus is coming next week, you're going to need a bigger room. And so congratulations. I'd love to come. I may come to that one. And
Join.
I would like, yeah, maybe. Yeah, yes. And he was stationed in Tampa during the Gulf Wars, and was very highly sought after for speaking engagements. So thank you for having me. I'm happy to try to answer some
We're
questions.
just going to do some questions. If you're a club member and would like to ask the commissioner a question, please go to the microphone. Right here in the microphone.
Sure. Thank you for your comments today. You did a fantastic job, you and the speaker, during the COVID, allowing us lobbyists to be able to testify remotely and provide some input. I think that you last month announced an initiative whereby there would be restrictions on Chinese companies buying farmland near strategic places in Florida. I wonder if you would tell us how prevalent that is and expound on that a little bit. And thank you for doing that.
Thank you. That is a very good question. So what we've discovered, and really in the last few years, is that we have many enemies in this world as the United States, and they have been buying property all over the United States for years. And a lot of those properties are close to our military installations. A lot of these properties are strategic agriculture lands. And so the bill that we introduced a few weeks ago, maybe a few months ago now, was that in the state of Florida, it's not just China, but any of our identified national enemies, which the legislature will put together, will not be able to purchase land in the state of Florida any longer, our agricultural land or around our military installations. And I know the legislature is working on it, so it could include others. And if they currently own land, and they do, there are tens of thousands of acres owned by some of our foreign enemies in this state today. We're giving them a process by which they have to divest themselves of that property. And so it's going to be an orderly process, but it's something that we're looking forward to. And when you're thinking about 50, 100 years from now, think about more and more of your farmland being bought up by these foreign enemies, or think about one of our current allies that becomes a foreign enemy. You know, Germany and Russia made a pact 30 years ago when perestroika and everything was going on, right? Everything was, the sky was blue and the grass was green. And today, they don't sell one cubic foot of natural gas anywhere in Western Europe that I'm aware of. And so when you think about who your enemies are going to be tomorrow, this legislation will be able to be expanded. So if our enemies expand, we will be able to include those folks on that list. And the state of Florida is leading on that in this country because we're going to protect not only our farmlands, our military installations here, but we're looking at it literally for the next, in perpetuity.
Good afternoon. I have a comment and a question. First is my comment is about the sales exemption card for farmers. As leader of a nonprofit, I would love to be able to do that when in making purchases through our nonprofit and have that for staff. So dream. But second is that across the economy, many sectors are facing labor shortages. So could you just talk about the status of labor in agriculture? Thank you.
Yes, a very, very good question. And there are, I never thought out of all my time of service and being a small business owner that we would overstimulate the state of Florida's economy the way it has been overstimulated. And the housing shortage, 1,000, 1,500 people a day moving here still today, keeping our land and housing costs higher artificially. In some case, I say artificially because capitalism has a way of fixing these problems over time, excesses. But the reality is that we have a severe shortage of labor in agriculture, and we do have federal programs, H-2A programs, that are administered clearly through the federal government that takes up some of that slack. But the dysfunction that is Washington puts all of these things in jeopardy. And we talk about the weights of environmentalism or the weights of other, lawsuits and tort and things in the state of Florida for your farmers. One of the largest is a labor shortage. The federal government truly acts like they don't believe this exists. And so when our supply chains are breaking, just as they have on semiconductors and roof products or windows or construction or anything else, this is one of those supply chains that we cannot afford to be broken. Your food supply chain is the last straw, right? And again, when food quits showing up in the supermarket, that's when we'll know we went too far. I think we've already went too far. And I actually think that what comes out of Washington, 99% of it is just pure incompetence. And it's looked through the lens of politics, not through what's right for the American people. And, it's a tragedy. And it's something that as a farmer, we have to work with. We have to pay higher wages. And you say, well, and I can talk about eggs for a long time about the price of eggs if you want to. But anyway, when you think about the labor input costs alone in the last few years coming through the pandemic, and you didn't go to the store anytime during the pandemic, there weren't eggs there. You remember when imagine this is April the 10th and you're locked in your house and we're all scared. Well, how bad is this? And how many of us are going to die from this pandemic? Every day, every employee we had to show up at that egg farm to put eggs in cartons to deliver to the store. The first day, the second week, the third week. And these are some of the most valuable employees in the entire planet. We don't value our agriculture the way it should be valued. And but there was not one day off in the pandemic for your farmers. By the way, that includes truck drivers too. And clearly your healthcare system was burdened because we didn't even have the PPE that we needed to properly function. And so labor is a serious issue. Unfortunately, the federal government does not take it seriously. Completely dysfunctional at the border, completely dysfunctional federal programs. And there are things that we're going to work on with our delegation to try to fix that, but it's not likely to get fixed. And I'm afraid that labor issue could be the ultimate stress that will start shutting down some big avenues for food delivery in this state and country.
We have one from Miss Martha.
Commissioner, we're delighted you're here and thank you for all of the issues you've been championing. I think most of the people in the room, we certainly know the economic impacts of the COVID pandemic, but we never stop to think about some of the pandemics that affect our industries here. And as a poultry farmer, you've been facing the avian influenza pandemic. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit as to the economic effect, not only of that, but with all our importations of food. We import a lot of pests and diseases throughout Florida. We all know the python problem down in Everglades, but could you speak a little bit to the way the avian influenza pandemic has affected the poultry industry?
Sure, that's a great question. So being in the egg business, you have to learn to, your biosecurity is one of the most important things you can do. So after 9/11, going back 20 plus years, farmers had to really put in process a plan for biosecurity and security in general of your food supply. If you want to take a lot of people out in a hurry, right, you can cut off your food supply, that'll do the trick. Or you could taint those products with certain items and that would do the trick. And so we had to really ramp up our security. So when you think about the avian flu in the last 12 months, and by the way, the avian flu comes from Europe generally. It will come across Greenland and into the United States through the Midwest. It can come across from Europe, Russia to Alaska into the United States. So you have much more of an outbreak in commercial flocks throughout the Midwest. That's generally where it comes in. And all of us have to have biosecurity plans not to allow that to get into your facilities. And you'd say, well, how do you do that? Well, first of all, you have to have protective facilities that other animals can't get into, because you're going to bring it in through the feces and other things. Your employees that come to work every day have to fully decon and get changed into new clothes to go into that chicken barn before they can go to work into your chicken house. Those are the type of processes that we have to use. What are some of the challenges there? When you have free range birds, if you go to any of your stores, you'll see you got cage free, free roam, Olean, organic, all of the different types of eggs that you have. But if you have free roaming birds, they have access to the outside. Well, guess who else has access to the outside? The waterfowl and birds that are bringing avian flu into the system in the first place. And so the more we can protect our commercial farms, the better we can protect our egg supply. Now, we've lost 50 million birds in the last 12 months in the United States. There are a total of 320 million birds that are laying eggs generally every day when you're at full capacity. So it's about 20% of the population have been taken out. You saw those spike from relatively $2 a dozen to about $6 a dozen in the stores. On a retail basis, which is what your farmer gets, they peaked about 4, 5, 6 weeks ago at around $5.50 a dozen, all based on supply and demand. That market is quoted just like any other commodity on the New York Stock Exchange, just like sugar or corn or wheat or any commodity, gasoline, all of them. All these commodities are quoted, and the farmer gets paid generally based on that market that's quoted off of the exchange. And so, it ran up to about $5.50 in the Southeast. And within the last 3 weeks, it had fallen all the way to $2.30 or 40 cents a dozen. So down almost $3 in a month. And so you should have seen and felt that in the grocery stores. And because I get my eggs out of my backyard, I don't get them at the grocery store much. But you should have seen several dollars a dozen less for eggs today, even today, because I think they've crept back up to about $2.60 a dozen on the wholesale level. So if you're at a store, if you're paying, I guess, I don't know what they mark them up, but $3, $3.25 a dozen. And but you should have seen a substantial reduction. The best thing that can happen to the egg business is to keep the avian flu out. Clearly, every time there's an outbreak, we review those biosecurity issues. If you come to Trilby today to go to see an egg farm, you couldn't because you can't get in anymore. But if you were there to work, you've got to drive through and disinfectant stations. You have to reclothe yourself before you go in that building, and you have to have codes to get into any of the doors. So, the level of security that we have around these facilities now is enormous, and it's a cost of burden. When you think about the inflation that went along with that, fertilizer costs went from $300 a ton to $1,000 a ton, which means feed costs went from, doubled or tripled. And when you think about the inflation that was in the system a year ago, and it's like, oh, thank God it's only 6% now, right? Because it's not 9. 6 is really bad also, right? And the Federal Reserve is having to deal with that. But when you think about inflation, it affects the people who can at least afford it the most. People on fixed incomes, people on the lower economic scale of this country. And that's why we have to make sure that we fight inflation. And that's also why we have to make sure that we are lifting rocks off of the back of our farmers. Because when that food cost goes up in that store and we're like, oh my God, we just paid $300 for food. Think about the family that's making $15 an hour today, paying a grocery bill like that. And that's what I constantly do. And as a farmer, we want to see avian flu gone. It's naturally recurring. It will be back. And this is the time it would be back. In the spring is when it would start. So hopefully there won't be any more outbreaks this year. And you'll see the cost of eggs will settle back in accordingly. If we have no more outbreaks, you could see them settle back in there probably around $2 a dozen again. Even with all the challenges we have with labor and feed costs and delivery costs and all of the things. So that's generally what's good for farmers in the short run of, because you hear a lot about their making a lot of money, generally comes back to haunt us, just like most capitalist things do when things get out of line, supply and demand.
Good. Well, Commissioner, we want to thank you on behalf of the Economic Club and present you with this award. And just remember our next program, March 27th at the Dunlap Center with General Petraeus, and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.